HDR is something I don't do very much these days, but I have a friend who does, and I was asked to check out the new Aurora HDR 2019, and I wanted to use some brackets and share my thoughts on the new software, because, like I said, I don't do HDR much these days, so I don't have any recent brackets that I could use. Aurora HDR 2019 has a brand new engine. It's faster, it's more powerful, it has some AI in it. It's pretty impressive from first glance. So I'm going to compare it to HDR that can be created inside of Lightroom and in HDR that can be created inside of Photomatix latest version, and then compare it to Aurora HDR 2019. Let's head to the computer and check it out. So first things first, I am here in Lightroom and I wanted to show you the brackets. Now these brackets were supplied to me by my friend Daryl from Digital Artscape. He is a fantastic real estate photographer here in New Jersey, and I asked him for a set of brackets because I don't do much HDR anymore these days, and he does, because he does a lot of real estate photography. So I don't have any recent brackets that I can use in these tests, so I asked my friend Daryl for some brackets from a recent real estate session he did. And these are what he sent me. Not the best kitchen, the most beautiful kitchen out there, but there's a lot of texture between the wood, the tiles, and the granite countertop. So we thought this would be a good test to see how will it do with the textures and the exposure of the brackets, the changes in the brackets, with a, well, there's gonna be a lot of texture. So we'll see how it does with the texture and also keeping it realistic. So first things first, these are the brackets. And you can see that, again, it's not the most attractive kitchen. It's not it's not ugly, but it's not extremely modern. But it does the job. And I'm not going to be removing anything. Like, for example, I'm not going to remove the, whatever this is. It looks like it might be a smoke detector of some sort. I'm not going to be removing that. I'm not going to do anything with the light. I'm just going to leave it as is. I'm not going to remove the outlet here or here. I'm just going to let it be. And that's about it. And let's see. Okay. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do an HDR inside here in Lightroom. So I'm going to select all of these. Going to go up to Photo, Photo Merge, and HDR. And we're going to see what Lightroom does with the HDR. Now, it's worth noting that, of course, Photoshop would do the same thing. I am going to turn off Auto Align because it does not need auto align, because Daryl uses a tripod, so all three will be aligned. I don't need to do any deghosting because, again, there's no movement here. Everything is perfectly still. Now, I'm going to leave auto settings on because I want Lightroom to choose the default that it's going to be, and I'm going to hit merge. Now, it's going to take the DNG files that Daryl supplied me, and I'm going to create the HDR inside of Lightroom. It's worth noting that Lightroom only does a 16-bit raw file, whereas a lot of other software will do 32-bit software, like Aurora HDR 2019. Now, it's also worth noting that Lightroom is creating a DNG file that can use camera profile, so I can actually autocorrect. It'll detect the lens and everything from the original brackets, which are ported into the new raw file it's creating, which is nice. It is creating a raw file as the HDR. And again, I can do a lens correction. Now, here is the final product that it created. This is untouched. This is just what Lightroom created. And you can see it looks pretty realistic. It looks pretty darn good. And I can go in and I can adjust this. So let's take a look. I'm just going to go to the develop module real quick. And I want to show you first, I want to show you that I can turn on lens correction and let it correct for any distortion. So I'm going to go lens correction, and I'm going to turn that on. You can see it automatically detected the camera and lens that Daryl was using. I'm going to turn on chromatic aberration fix, and I'm going to go back up here, and we can do some white balance correction. So I can go in and I can say, let's go to daylight, and there we go. Let's go to flash, and you can see it is actually changing. It looks pretty good. I can actually go in and I can just, do the manual white balance like that. And that looks a lot more natural. I can now adjust, because this is an HDR, I can actually adjust the exposure. If you look at the window in the back, you can see that is getting nicely exposed. And we can bring up the shadows a little bit more, and then bring up some contrast, and there we go. Very clean HDR. You can see the lines are pretty much straight. You can see the line right here on the edge is practically perfectly straight. That's a combination of two things. That's a combination of Daryl doing good alignment when he sets up the scene, and it's also a combination of the lens correction. Now, while there are some, upsides and downsides of every software, one of the ones for Lightroom is it's creating the raw file of the HDR with all the metadata intact, so you can do the lens correction. The downside is, and it's also in Lightroom, so you don't have to leave Lightroom, which is nice. The downside is that you can't do batches that I'm aware of, and also that it is actually 16-bit, so that's a downside as well. But otherwise, that looks like a pretty darn good HDR. So we're going to close out of Lightroom, we're going to load up Photomatix, and we're going to do a quick one in Photomatix as well. Okay, so here we are now in Photomatix, and I am going to just drag in these 3 raw files right to here. And it's going to go ahead and compile the brackets into the HDR. Now, it's worth noting that Photomatix is actually designed for JPEG brackets, not for RAW files. It can do RAW files, but it works faster, and apparently it works better with JPEGs as well as TIFF files, from what I understand. So a little dialog popped up, merge to HDR or open the files only. We, of course, want to merge to HDR. And we are going to, it shows you like what the brackets are and whatnot. We can check the exposures if we want to. It does say that it should be okay. It is saying that there is, we could increase the EV level. It's nice that it tells you this if you want it. Not all software does that. And we're going to choose merge options. We don't need to align the sources, again, because they're already aligned. Daryl was using a tripod, so it's good. We are not going to do ghosting because, again, nothing moved. We're not going to do any noise reduction, but it can do that in here, which is cool. You can also do that in Lightroom after the fact. And then we are going to reduce chromatic aberration, and there are some raw conversion options. So this would not show if you were just doing the JPEGs or a TIFF file, but it does for RAW. I'm not going to touch that. And we have the option to show the 32-bit unprocessed image. I'm not going to show that. I'm just going to go ahead and merge. So it's kind of the basic settings. A little dialog popped up. It's kind of the basic settings. To a point, I did do a little bit of adjustment, adding the chromatic aberration removal, which I think is important, especially for modern day sensors and lenses and with HDR, because when you do HDR, it does bring out the chromatic aberration more than what you might normally see in just one bracket. So let's see how long this takes. It might take a little bit again. Photomatix is a little slower when it comes to doing this with raw files. All right, so it already finished, and as you can see here, it showed me a pretty realistic image, and there's a bunch of presets that I can go ahead and choose from. Now I'm going to go to natural because I think that is the best starting point when you want something that is natural. So it's going to basically do an even balance of everything. You can see it's a little dark, and what is nice is that you do get some sort of options here, so I can go ahead and just brighten things a little bit, and it will in fact brighten it. It might take a little bit to do, but it will brighten it. I can also do some strengthening and contrast and things like that to enhance everything. And we could even adjust the whites and blacks. And you can see here as I go to hide original and show original, you can see the difference. This is the original. This is what I've already adjusted. It's a pretty nice HDR. Again, like it could use some more contrast. It could use a bunch more of other things. As I bring up this local contrast, it actually looks a lot better. A lot more texture going on over here. Now you can see that it is, sorry about the box here. I can't get rid of this box. That's part of being able to zoom in. But you can see over here on the edge, it is not as straight as it is in Lightroom. And that is actually because, well, there's no lens correction here in Photomatix. But it does give you some basic options. But again, you can export this now as a TIFF file, as a JPEG, and you can do some more edits from there. So I'm just going to hit to finish. and it is actually fusing these images, and it is going to let me save it. So I'm going to save it as a JPEG so that at the end of the video, we can compare all 3 versions. And I'm going to go ahead and just save this. Save as. And I'm going to call it Photomatix HDR test. Save it on the desktop. And we're good. So next up, Aurora HDR 2019. We're in Aurora HDR 2019. Again, I'm going to go ahead and drag these brackets, and you can see it pretty much loaded up pretty fast, shows you the EV levels, and also gives you the option to auto line. Again, I'm not going to auto line. I can do ghost reduction. I can do color denoise. I'm going to turn those off because, again, I want to see the natural result that it provides. I am going to turn on chromatic aberration because I want to compare that as between each of the 3 software. And I'm going to hit create HDR. Now, this should be the fastest of all 3 to create, especially from the raw files. Now, Lightroom might be fast because it's doing 16-bit, but Aurora is doing a true 32-bit HDR from raw files, and Photomatix is converting the raw files to JPEGs first before it does the HDR. So all 3 are going to give some different results. Aurora HDR also has some AI features in it, so it should really detect what kind of image it is and help fine-tune the natural result it gives you based on that. So here is the result it gives you right out of the gate. And you can see, again, it looks pretty natural. And the exposure is actually, look at the outside. The exposure is pretty darn good over here. It's a little dark at the top, but that's okay. It can be adjusted. But everything else looks pretty good, I must say. I probably wouldn't do much aside from lightening it up just a tad, lightening up the darker areas, the shadows. Now we can also do this sort of before after. So you can see that's the base exposure. That's the HDR. You can see the outside and so on. So it's pretty cool that you can do that. We can actually go and see all the presets. Now neutral would be that. And that's what we want to start with is neutral. I'm going to hide the presets. Now what is cool about Aurora HDR 2019 is it does give you all of these editing settings that we could do. Sort of like Lightroom. We can do a ton of edits. We can even add LUTs. We can add LUTs on top of this if we want to use a LUT for some color enhancements. We can, of course, we can do the white balancing, just like we can in Lightroom. The white balance picker doesn't look like it's as good as Lightroom. I probably have to choose an actual neutral instead of just a white. I probably have to choose a gray. Now, I don't know what in here was actually gray. If it was me doing this, I'd have a color chart in here before I actually do the brackets. So I'm going to just say flash for the time being, because I know that Daryl tends to use flash a lot. That could be where the shadows are coming from here. Sometimes he doesn't use flash. So this is daylight. This is flash. Flash looks a little bit more natural. And we can, like I said, we can adjust the highlights and shadows. I'm probably going to brighten that up a little, and then we will enhance the contrast. So it's make it not too crazy. And then let's look at the before and after. Yeah, it looks pretty good. All right, so I actually think I'm going to let's bring that back down. It was too much contrast. And I'm going to bring up the exposure overall. Yeah, that looks much better. And we can bring down the highlights. We can actually do some local adjustments in here. So I can actually go in and I can just do a brush, which is kind of nice. And I could just brush in here. And then we can take this local adjustment and we can bring that down, just that one thing. You can see now I'm masking and just adjusting that. And I can go ahead and turn off the mask and bring up the exposure on its own without it, and so on. So some pretty cool things we can do. We can also do luminosity masking, which will create a bunch of different levels of masking that we could do for the different brightnesses and whatnot of the image. So there you go. That is probably right here is probably where I would stop this. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of things that we could do. We can put on a polarizer. We can adjust the actual HDR parts, the details, tone curves, HSL, a lot of stuff that you can do inside of Lightroom, we can do inside of Aurora HDR 2019. And of course, you've got all these different presets that you could do. You can hide the layers if you want. You can add more layers, so we can do local adjustments per layer. What I was doing was just a quick overall, but there's a lot that you can do. As you saw, we can collapse all these things. We can do single view, so just like Lightroom, you can see just what is being done. And like Lightroom is a lens correction. So this is not doing an auto lens correction, whereas it detects the lens and camera and automatically adjusts, but you can actually do manual lens correction, so we can adjust for distortion as you see right here. So let's go ahead and do that and straighten it out a little bit. And there you go. Now look at that. Now look at the edge. It is perfectly even from top to bottom on this edge, and we're going to hit done. And that is great. It is now complete. So now we can actually save this as well. We're going to export to an image. I'm going to call this Aurora 2019 HDR test, just so it matches the rest. Save it to the desktop and save. So we are going to load this up in preview. I want to just check the chromatic aberration. I'm specifically going to look at the window on each of these, because part of HDR is being able to bring the highlights down and the shadows up without really screwing things up. And you can see here that it looks a little fuzzy over here on the chairs. So again, I'm going to look at two areas in each of these photos. The window and these chairs. I want to see what each of these do. So let's open it up in just Apple Preview. Okay, so here we are in Apple Preview. I'm going to start with the order that I did this in. Let's start with Lightroom, and we're going to just zoom in. Oop, I had to zoom down on me. We're going to zoom in, and then I don't think I can grab a hand to move around, so I'm just going to have to do this with the mouse, but it's okay. Or I can use my trackpad. So we can see here that there's no real chromatic aberration showing. You do see some lines here on the edges, but like right here you can see a little line on the edge, but it's actually not that bad, and you can't really tell in a distance, so I don't mind it. Let's check out this chairs over here. You can see the chairs look good, and so I'm curious to see what Aurora did, because the chairs from Lightroom look real good. And again, I did no auto correction as far as alignment goes, because Darrow had this on a tripod, so there shouldn't be any alignment issues. But specifically, the two things I was looking at. Oh, and look at the reflection in the refrigerator. We'll notice that it's pretty dark here, but in Photomatix it looked a lot brighter. So I'm curious to see how that looks as well. So three things we're going to be looking at is the chairs, as you can see in Lightroom they look good. The reflection, I'm curious to see how that comes out, and then Aurora. And then the windows, we're going to look at the chromatic aberration between the window frame and the outside, which looks okay from Lightroom. All right, so let's move on to Photomatix. Let's start with the window. Window looks good. Actually, the line is less apparent in Photomatix than it was in Lightroom. So it looks like Photomatix did a better job with that chromatic aberration than Lightroom did. Let's check out the chairs. Chairs look good, nice and in focus, just like it was. No blur, no weird ghosting going on. The reflection, as you can see, the reflection in the refrigerator is much brighter, and that could be just how Photomatix handles the shadows in their slider control. It might be a little more sensitive, so this is actually much brighter. And again, no matter what, you can always do a neutral and then bring it into Lightroom or Photoshop and do more adjustments for either of these. Lightroom, you can do adjustments right there. Photomatix, you can save it and then bring it into Lightroom or Photoshop and do your adjustments. And then Aurora, you can do your adjustments, including local adjustments, right in the software. So between these two, I would actually say, let's zoom out so these are both on the same level. There we go. So I would say Lightroom looks more natural. However, Photomatix has some more detail going on here with the local adjustment, with the local contrast, I should say. A little more contrast, but again, that can all be brought out in Lightroom. But again, this looks more natural. It doesn't look like an HDR besides from the window. So maybe this is the winner between the two because it looks less like an HDR and more like a photo. Now let's check out what Aurora did. Now Aurora, first thing I can notice is it is blurry here by the chairs. I'm not sure what Aurora was trying to do. Actually, all of this is blurry. It looks like it didn't do a good job aligning, which is really interesting. I might go back and just choose alignment just out of curiosity to see if it fixes that. I won't include that in the video because, well, you know what? I will include it in the video. I will go back and see what happens with alignment because it just looks like one of the frames, one of the brackets is completely out of sync, but this was done on a tripod, so it should be perfect. Everything is actually soft, blurry, because one of the brackets is out of sync. If we go to the window, yeah, everything is blurry. That's really interesting. But aside from that, again, I'll go back to Aurora and do it with alignment. But beside from that, you can see the exposure looks good. It looks natural, besides from the blurriness. The color tone, the colors look natural. There's nothing too sharp, too contrasty. And the refrigerator is actually brighter too. So it's more in line with what Photomatix did with the refrigerator. All right, so let me just go back before I give my final feedback. Let me go back to Aurora and just do a auto alignment of the brackets, and I'll be right back. All right, so right now it's creating the HDR again with auto alignment on and chromatic aberration on. I'm hoping that it aligns it, but I will actually question the Skylum team because this was done on a tripod. It should have, nothing moved. It was done with a remote, not like the camera was touched. So it really should be perfectly aligned. I mean, look what Lightroom did, look what Photomatix did. There's no reason for the photo to be, one of the brackets to be off when auto alignment is turned off because they're perfectly aligned. So let's see what happens. This might take a little bit longer because it does have to analyze for alignment and then correct. So let's give it a second. All right, so we are here and I'm not even going to do any adjustments. I'm just going to save this. Export this as an image. I'm going to say Aurora HDR test aligned. And everything else is the same, and we're going to save it. Okay, so this is the aligned version, and as you can see, it's actually perfect now. So for some reason, it couldn't get the alignment, even though they're perfectly aligned as is, it couldn't get the alignment without the alignment checked. So maybe it's a bug in Aurora 2019, or maybe it's something that Skylum team has to look at. But with that said, and again, I didn't do any color or contrast adjustments. Let's take a look at that window. The window looks really good too. So Lightroom was the worst of the three windows for the chromatic aberration. Aurora looks like it was the best. You see no artifact of that chromatic aberration between the contrast of the outside and the windowsill. So that's in window frame. Everything looks really good, very, very natural. I would then have to adjust for white balance. I'd have to adjust for, brightness, make sure the exposure is good on the inside. But other than that, it's now perfect. So I would just want to make things a little bit more vibrant, sort of like what you see here with what Photomatix did. Just make sure the colors are good. But, what Lightroom did. I was in the wrong one. So what Lightroom did, you can see how vibrant the tones are in the wood compared to everything else. But yeah, I don't know. It's really interesting about this. Look at this. This is, again, without alignment, even though this is on a tripod and using a remote, so there should be no alignment issues. This is with alignment, okay? Now this has no color or anything, no adjustments. This was a little bit of adjustment in the color and contrast. Very interesting. I'm going to notify the Skylum team, and if they have anything to say, or if they want these brackets to test, I'll sure be sending those along for them to try it. That's the difference between the three softwares. Lightroom, again, Lightroom can only do it inside of Lightroom, and again, Lightroom is a 16-bit HDR, but it does save it as a raw file. It cannot do brackets. You have to select the brackets you want to use. It cannot do batch brackets of HDR. You have to select the bunch of brackets you want to make an HDR and then make it and then move on to the next one. Photomatix is not meant to do HDRs from RAW. So if you insert a RAW, it has to use its RAW converter to create the JPEGs and then it'll make the HDR. It also gives you very little control over the exposure and contrast and everything inside of Photomatix. You do have some editing, but not what you would have in Lightroom or Aurora HDR. So you'd have to save it from Photomatix and bring it into your Photoshop or wherever you want to do your edits. And then Aurora gives you sort of the best of both worlds. It's fast, it's powerful, gives you all the editing options. It's 32-bit. You can even export from Lightroom to Aurora HDR 2019. But there was this weird bug or something going on that I need to address with them. So yeah, you know, I'm impressed. I've always used Photomatix for years, and now that Aurora is out, 2019 is so powerful, I might wind up switching. I can do individual photos as an HDR, or I can do brackets. But again, I'm not doing many brackets, but you never know. I might wind up going to Aurora down the road. I'm excited though for Luminar because that is going to be closer to a Lightroom competitor overall. So I'm excited to see what Luminar, the next version of Luminar, has to offer, and I'll be sharing that once I get my hands on that. So if you are interested in Aurora HDR 2019, you can scroll down to the description below and grab the link and click it. Learn more about Aurora HDR 2019 and test it out. If you like this video, click that subscribe button below now. I publish new videos every Monday and Thursday whenever possible. You don't want to miss it.